Hey there guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is all about how to choose your medical school. I'm currently a third year medical student at Imperial College London, and I want to give you guys my advice that would have been really helpful if I was to apply for medical school again. This video is split up into different sections. I firstly be giving an introduction about myself and how I chose my universities. I'll then be talking about eligibility, which will involve your UCAT scores, personal statement, and also things such as FOI, freedom of information, which we will get into. And then I'll also be talking about using your strengths. I think strengths is very important, and I'll get into that as well. And finally, I'll also be talking about other things such as location, course structure, which are all very important when choosing your medical school. So without further ado, let's get started. So firstly, let's start off with introduction. So as I said, I'm currently a third year medical student at Imperial College London. My name is Shivank and I applied to 4 different medical schools. So I applied to Imperial College London, Leicester, Queen Mary's and St. George's. So firstly, my main preference was to stay in London. So by doing this, I was able to eliminate a lot of universities such as Glasgow, Edinburgh, etc., where I really didn't want to go ideally. And so by doing this, I was able to narrow down quite a lot of universities, and I also want to keep one university outside London, so I chose Leicester because I think it's not too far from London, and I quite like the course structure at the time. And so another way in which I narrowed down universities further, which I'll go into eligibility in more detail, is my UCAT score. So at the time, my UCAT score was 720, and at that time, that was a top 10% decile. And so that was clearly a strength of my application. And so I made sure to look at to universities which had a UCAT score which I met or which I had a higher chance. So for example, when I was applying, King's College London had really high UCAT cutoffs, and in previous years they had applicants of around 700 or 710 who were getting in. So I felt like I was really close or really pushing it for KCL, and so didn't apply there. Whereas, for example, for St. George's, I saw previous applicants had much lower UCAT scores required to get in, and so I thought I had a better chance. And on the university, I believe it had certain cutoffs that I had to meet for every single section, and I met all of them, and so I knew I had a high chance of getting an interview. And so that's how I chose my 4 universities. I then got interviews for all 4 of them, and was then able to get 3 offers. So St. George's, Imperial, Queen Mary's, and I withdrew from Leicester because Leicester was going to be my backup university, but I got a reduced offer from St. George's, so I was able to use this as my backup. And so the way I chose between Imperial and Queen Mary's, or for example other universities, is that I really like Imperial, as in I really like the course structure offered at Imperial. The idea it's integrated, so you get both medical experience and learning about the medicine behind it, and also have placements starting as early as first year. I also quite like the campus at Imperial, so when I visited for open day and a conference before, I thought it was really nice and aesthetic. And also talking to older years who went in Imperial, they also quite liked it. And so a lot of these factors alongside its course structure, I think really appealed to me, that Imperial would be somewhere where I would thrive, and I'm really happy with the decision I made. And so that's enough for my introduction. I'll now be talking about eligibility, which will make up the bulk of this YouTube video. So with eligibility, I really want to talk about the 3 key things, and this is with the 3 different sections. So we have UCAT/BMAT, because I believe BMAT is being discarded soon after, so I'll mainly be talking about UCAT, but we have UCAT/BMAT, we have freedom of information, or FOI, and we also have GCSE and A levels. So firstly, with the idea of UCAT. So your UCAT score. So let's say your UCAT score is 720, the same as mine. So when I was applying for universities, I created an Excel spreadsheet. An Excel spreadsheet, it had the list of all the universities that for medicine, with, for example, their grade offers, so A star, AA, A star, triple A star, etc. They also had another column for previous UCAT applications. So for example, let's say KCL had a UCAT cutoff of 740. So I would write 740, and instantly I would know at the end of the columns, I would be like cross, because I know I can't apply there, because if last year the cutoff was 740, it's likely to increase this year. And so I did this for every single university, with a column for UCAT score, a column for GCSE and A levels, a column for predicted, etc., so on and so forth. And so by doing this, I was able to narrow down a lot of universities. Because, for example, one of the universities required band 1 in SJT or gave higher marks for band 1, and so instantly I knew this would put me at a disadvantage because I had band 2, and so I was able to eliminate this university. Furthermore, I also had universities where, as I mentioned, I didn't really want to go because it wasn't in London, and so I could remove these universities as well. And so by doing this slowly and slowly, I was able to narrow down to a lot of universities. Now, this is where FOI comes in, freedom of information. A lot of the universities don't always publish data about how many applicants got in, how many applicants interviewed, etc. And so what you can do, and I can show you on the screen right now, you can request information beforehand about how many applicants got in, how many applicants got interviewed in the last year cohort. So not this year most likely, but the year before. You can get a record of how many got in, how many didn't, etc. And I think that's really good because it then gives you an overview as to what percentage chance you have of getting in. So again, let's give an example of KCL. Let's say their cutoff is 700. So you know you will meet their cutoff next year if you have a score of 720. Now, if you look at the percentage that got in after interview, it's only 10%. Whereas another university, let's say St. George's, has an acceptance rate of 90% after interview. This would make me more inclined to do St. George's, even though I might be good at interviews. I'd rather secure a medical space rather than no medical space. And so that's why I think is really helpful, because it gives you a percentage which you can compare, and then you can see which is the highest percentage chance to get in. Because let's say if you're not that great at interviews, you know you can apply to universities which have a higher percentage chance of getting an offer after the interview. And so what you can do for this is you can request information from universities' websites or something called FOI, as I mentioned, or use previous data, because sometimes people have requested it as well for like 2 years before. So for example, 2021, 2020, etc. And then you can use this data because it will be relatively accurate or up to date. And then finally, talking about GCSE and A levels. So a lot of universities still like to use the GCSEs because they obviously a lot of medicine is to do with academics, and so they want to know that the student is also performing well academically. And so if your GCSE is a strong point, look at universities which have a more lenience or like people with higher GCSEs, because this will put you at an advantage. And similarly, if you have a really high predicted, so let's say all A stars, then look at universities which give extra points for more A levels, or more A stars, and same for more A levels. And so it's really important that you use all this information and selectively use universities in order to have the highest chance of acceptance. I think then once you've looked at the universities which have the highest chance of acceptance, you can then narrow down and filter to the ones you would actually enjoy or be happy going with. So now let's talk about strengths, and this really links into everything I've been saying. I think with your application, it's really important that you use your strengths to your advantage. If your A level is really good and you have 4 A stars, whereas most other people may have 1 A star AA or 3 A's, then definitely use this as a strength. Apply to universities which have this, because this will put you at a better advantage and give you more points in the system compared to others that don't. Similarly, if something is your weakness, so let's say if your UCAT didn't go as well as you wish it would, then you can apply to universities which have lower UCAT cutoffs, or you can apply to more BMAT universities, which is still a risk, I think, because you haven't exactly done your BMAT. But I think at the end of the day, you'll have a higher chance than applying to university which has a high UCAT cutoff, because you'll just get straight rejected. The idea, there's not really a chance if let's say last year they accepted people who are 720 and your UCAT score is 600, then I don't really think it's worth applying, because you're much better off applying to a different university which has a lower UCAT cutoff, because you will have a higher chance. And so make sure you use your strengths as best as you can. If you really feel like your application is lacking and one thing is pulling it back, so for example, let's say your GCSE grades aren't that good, make sure you try and look for universities that don't put that much preference at GCSEs, because it will again negatively mark you down. So here's an example of what university you may look at, and as you can see here, they've highlighted certain sections which they think are more important. So finally, let's talk about the last section. This section involves a lot of different things, such as location, course structure, etc. So firstly, location. If you really want to stay in London again, then again, you can narrow down universities to pick on your London universities, such as Imperial, Queen Mary's, KCL, etc. If you want to live out London, then obviously there's a wider area you can choose from. Always bear in mind the costs the university has, because obviously living in London can be very expensive. However, universities are very accommodating, and there's things such as bursaries which can really help, and the university are always there to look out for you. Another thing to also consider is the course structure. If you find that problem-based learning is something that's really appealing to you and something that's really interesting, then definitely go for the universities that have this. Also, the statistics for universities are very important, so you can have a look, and perhaps on the website that you might like, have a look at the course and say, okay, really like this because it's number one for research, such as Imperial is known for its research, so you really like the idea and want to study there. Another example of course structure is, so for example, let's say you've done English A level and you really like the idea of doing essays, and so Oxbridge is a definite option for you, because it will really give you a high chance that you will enjoy it because there's a lot of essays involved. And finally, I also want to talk about interviews. I think interviews are a big part, and many people overlook this. They just want to reach the interview stage, and then they can work on the interview. However, it's very important. Firstly, you need to work out whether you like science-based interviews or traditional MMIs, or one-to-ones, because each university will have a different one. So Oxbridge have science-based interviews, other universities have different style, and so it's very important that you have a look at this. Secondly, start preparing for interviews early. I think many people underestimate how difficult it can be and how much of a big part it is, because what I really like about interviews is once you've done your application, and you've got an interview, you have a high chance of getting in, as long as you do a really good in the interview and you put your foot forward. And so make sure you look at universities that have an interview which is suited to you, although this isn't a major part, hence why I put it in the last section. But overall, I would say that when choosing your medical schools, make sure you choose a place where you're really happy. You don't want to go to university where you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, because if you're not enjoying the campus or the people around you, then there is really no point. Secondly, I think it's really important that you choose a university which you ideally have a highest chance of getting in, because otherwise you'll be wasting an application. It's much better, I think, to choose a university which have a highest chance, having researched it, having looked at the campus, seeing its location, and seeing whether it's really feasible for you to be able to travel all day, etc. And thirdly, I think whatever you do, don't get stressed and overwhelmed, and just focus on the actual application before choosing the different universities. And so that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching.